They say pride is the most expensive thing a man can own. Not the mansion, not the motorcade, not the empire built on silence and fear. Pride. Because pride does not cost you money. It costs you everything else. Nora Voss knew this long before the night her husband drove away and left her standing in the rain. She had known it for 5 years. She had simply chosen every morning to unknow it. The Palmer House Hotel ballroom was the kind of room designed to make powerful people feel permanent. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured gold light across 500 guests in black tie and evening gowns. A jazz quartet played something slow and knowing in the corner. Waiters moved between tables with the silent efficiency of people paid never to be noticed. Outside November had turned Chicago into something raw and merciless. Inside, no one felt the cold. Nora stood near the east wall with a glass of champagne she had not touched. Her gown was the color of winter ice, and she wore it the way she wore everything Roman chose for her perfectly and without feeling it. She had learned in 5 years of marriage how to look exactly like what the occasion required. Tonight, the occasion required the composed and luminous wife of one of Chicago's most prominent men. She was good at it. She had become so good at it that some nights she frightened herself. She watched the room the way she always watched rooms now, not for pleasure, for information. Roman was across the ballroom near a marble column positioned as he always positioned himself at events like this, back to the wall, every exit visible, every approach anticipated. He was 42 and built like a man who had never once in his life been physically afraid of anything. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of easy authority that could not be purchased or performed, only accumulated over years of being the most dangerous person in every room he entered. He was laughing at something the deputy mayor had just said. The laugh was warm and generous and completely manufactured. Nora knew every version of Roman's laugh. That one was for audiences. To the deputy mayor, Roman Voss was a real estate developer and philanthropist. His name was on a plaque in the pediatric oncology ward at Northwestern Memorial. Children had gotten better in rooms that bore his name. To the organized crime division of the FBI, Roman Voss was the untouchable head of a syndicate that controlled the Chicago Port Union's 3 underground casino networks and the movement of untraceable firearms from the Great Lakes corridor south into Missouri. They had been trying to build a case against him for 11 years. They had nothing that would survive a preliminary hearing. To Nora, he was the man she had married at 23, the man who used to leave handwritten notes on the kitchen counter when he came home late, the man who had once driven 4 hours through a January snowstorm because she had mentioned offhand once that she missed the pie from a specific diner in Galena. He was also the man who had in the last 18 months become someone she recognized less and less with each passing week. She watched him work the room and felt the exhaustion settle behind her eyes, like something that had finally reached a depth from which it would not rise. Then she saw Miles. Her brother was near the bar on the far side of the ballroom, dressed in a charcoal suit that was slightly too new the way his suits always were lately. Miles Ashford was 34 years old, handsome in a way that photographed well, but felt slightly hollow in person, and he had the quality common to men who had grown up adjacent to wealth without quite having it themselves, the constant, subtle performance of belonging. He was smiling at something a man beside him had said, and it was a good smile, practiced. But Nora knew Miles's real smile the way she knew Roman's real laugh. And this was not it. What caught her attention was not Miles himself, but the man he was talking to, Callum Reed, Roman's underboss, 45 years old, thick through the chest, with a face designed by nature for anonymity. He was the kind of man who could stand in a room for an hour and not be remembered by a single person in it. That quality was not an accident. Roman had spent a decade selecting for it. Callum was good at being invisible, which made him extraordinarily good at his job. Nora watched Callum and Miles talk for 40 seconds. She counted. Callum said something low and brief. Miles nodded, once the nod of a man receiving confirmation rather than information. Then Callum turned and walked away, and Miles looked down at his drink with the careful neutrality of someone who has just been told something he needed not to react to in public. A cold thread moved through Nora's chest. She did not move toward either of them. She stood where she was and kept her expression pleasant and her posture easy, and she filed the moment away with the precision of a woman who had learned that in this world the things you noticed and said nothing about were often the things that later saved your life. 20 minutes passed. She accepted a compliment on the gown from the wife of a city alderman. She spoke briefly with the director of the Museum Foundation about the spring benefit. She smiled at 3 separate people whose names she had memorized from Roman's briefing on tonight's guest list, because Roman always gave her a briefing, because her social competence was part of the machinery of his public life. And she had accepted that role so completely, she had stopped noticing she was playing it. Then she watched Callum materialize at Roman's elbow. It was seamless, the kind of approach that looked like nothing, because it had been practiced into invisibility. Callum said something without turning his head. Roman continued his conversation with the deputy mayor without breaking rhythm. But his right hand dropped to his side, and Callum pressed something into his palm, a phone mat, black, no case. A burner. The kind that did not exist. Callum was gone before the deputy mayor finished his sentence. Roman glanced at the phone for 2 seconds. Something moved behind his eyes, not fear. Roman did not do fear. It was colder than fear. It was the look he got when a situation had just reclassified itself from manageable to requiring personal attention. Nora had seen that look a handful of times in 5 years. Each time something bad had followed. She set down her champagne glass on the nearest tray and walked toward her husband. She moved through the crowd the way she always did at these events, unhurried, composed, pausing once to touch the arm of a woman she recognized from the hospital benefit committee. No one watching her would have seen anything but grace. That was the performance. She had learned it so thoroughly it no longer felt like performance. It felt like a second skin she suspected she could no longer remove. Roman saw her coming. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly the way it always did. A man preparing himself. The deputy mayor excused himself with the timing of someone who had learned to read a room. For a moment, Nora and Roman simply looked at each other, husband and wife, in a room full of people who thought they understood who Roman Voss was. In a room full of people who had no idea at all who Nora Voss was, which had once felt like freedom and now felt like something else entirely. The FBI raided Miles's warehouse this afternoon, she said. Her voice was low and very even. His attorney called me at 7. While I was getting dressed up here, Roman said nothing. They found shipping containers that did not match the manifests, she continued. Federal agents are holding the site. Miles is currently in a conference room trying not to come apart while 2 assistant U.S. attorneys explain to him what obstruction of justice means. It is being handled. 3 words. She had heard those 3 words more times in 5 years than she could count. They had stopped meaning anything to her approximately 3 years ago. You promised me, she said. When we got married, you looked at me and you promised me that my family would not be touched. That was the one condition I gave you, the one line that would never move. And now you have been running weapons through my brother's shipping containers. Roman reached for her elbow. Not the place, he said. Then find me a place. He walked them into the private corridor behind the main ballroom. Dark velvet walls, low gold light, the muffled sound of jazz filtering through from the other side. The kind of space that existed for conversations that could not happen in public. Roman knew where every space like this was in every building he frequented. He had made it his business to know. When they were alone, he turned to face her, and the warmth he had been performing for the ballroom was simply gone. What stood in front of her was the real Roman, not the philanthropist, not the criminal the FBI had spent 11 years trying to indict. Something more complicated than either, a man who had built an empire with his hands and his will and his absolute refusal to be moved, and who had somewhere along the way stopped being able to distinguish between strength and obstinacy. The warehouse had nothing to do with Miles personally, he said. It was a routing decision. Your routing decision is going to send my brother to federal prison. Miles is not going to prison. I have the right people in the right positions. This will be resolved. You said that about the dock situation 2 years ago, and a man ended up dead, she said. Resolution in your world and resolution in mine are not the same thing. Something moved across his face. She pressed forward. You lied to me, Roman. Every night you came home, every morning you kissed my forehead and told me everything was under control. And the whole time you were building a target on my family's back. I was building security, he said, and his voice had taken on that particular flatness she had learned to recognize as the outermost edge of his patience. You think this life funds itself. The house, the security detail, the insulation from every threat that would otherwise have direct access to you. None of it comes from legitimate real estate. You knew who I was. I knew a man who wanted to be better than what he came from, she said. Now I just see his father's son." She had never said it before in 5 years. She had thought it had felt it gather in her throat during arguments and forced it back down. She said it now because she was tired. Tired of swallowing things. Tired of the careful management of her own honesty. The effect was total and immediate. Roman went very still, the particular stillness that was not calm, but its absolute opposite. His father had been a paranoid, brutal man who had driven his wife to a breakdown before being shot to death in a barber shop on the West Side. It was the one comparison that reached through every layer of armor Roman had built around himself and touched something undefended underneath. The silence between them lasted long enough to become its own kind of violence. "Get your coat," Roman said. His voice had dropped to something very quiet and very final. "We are leaving. I am not going anywhere with you right now." "You are my wife," he said, stepping into her space, his height casting a shadow over her in the narrow corridor. "And you will not do this here." She held his gaze. 5 years of practice had made her very good at not flinching. Then she turned and walked toward the elevator. The private parking garage beneath the Palmer house was everything the ballroom above it was not. Raw concrete, fluorescent light, the smell of exhaust and wet stone. The rain had intensified outside, and water was sheeting down the entrance ramp in thin silver curtains. The sound of it echoed off the walls and pillars like something amplified. Gareth Cole was waiting beside the black Maybach near the elevator bank. 50 years old, built for durability rather than speed, with the face of a man who had seen enough that very little surprised him any more. He had driven for Roman for 12 years. He had survived those 12 years by knowing with exceptional precision when to look away. He opened the rear door as Roman and Nora emerged from the elevator and kept his face absolutely neutral. Nora stopped 10 feet from the car. The overhead lighting was harsh and pale, and it made the shadows under her eyes look darker than they were. She had been awake since 6 that morning, and it was now past midnight, and she was wearing 4-inch heels and a gown that provided no warmth whatsoever, and she did not move toward the open car door. "Call Callum right now," she said, "tonight. Tell him to remove Miles's name from every manifest, every log, every digital record that connects him to those containers. Do it now, while there is still time to matter." Roman stood by the open door. The rain roared down the entrance ramp behind him. "No," he said. "Then I am done." She said it quietly, with no performance in it, and that quietness was what made it land. "I will walk out of here, and I will not come back. Not to the house, not to this, not to any of it." Roman's pride was not a simple thing. It was not vanity exactly, though it contained vanity. It was something more structural, something that had been load-bearing since he was a boy, watching his father conduct the world through absolute force of dominance, learning that yielding was not a transaction, but a surrender that could not be recovered from. In his world, in the world he had built and maintained and bled for, showing weakness in front of his own people was not a personal failing. It was a professional death sentence. Gareth was right there, 3 feet away, watching the pavement. The alcohol Roman had consumed over the course of the evening had not made him drunk so much as it had made him less willing to do the work of overriding his worst instincts. He looked at his wife, standing in the cold light, shivering slightly in her gown. Her eyes bright with tears, she was not going to let fall in front of him, and the part of him that loved her, the part that was still capable of recognizing what was happening, saw it clearly. She meant it this time. The other part, the louder part, the part that had kept him alive and in power for 2 decades, told him that if he yielded now, he would lose something. He would never recover. "You want to walk," he said. "Then walk." Nora's breath caught. She looked at him for a long moment, waiting. He had done things in their marriage that required recovery. He had said things that needed to be walked back. He had always, eventually, walked them back. She was waiting for the moment when his face would change, when he would step forward, when he would take off his jacket and put it over her shoulders the way he used to do. He stepped into the back of the Maybach and pulled the door shut. The sound of it closing echoed through the garage like something definitive. Inside the car, through the tinted window, Roman could see her, small in the pale light, her gown the color of ice, her hair beginning to come loose from the arrangement she had spent an hour on upstairs. She was not moving. "Gareth," Roman said. His driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "She is going to need another car," Gareth said carefully. "It is nearly 2 in the morning, and it is coming down hard out there," Drive Roman said. "Boss this neighborhood at this hour, I can call someone to drive." The Maybach's engine turned over. The car moved forward toward the ramp toward the street. Through the rear window, Roman watched the image of his wife recede, her stillness, her straight back, the champagne-colored light above her. He watched until the car turned up the ramp and she disappeared. He told himself she would call an Uber. He told himself she would be at the front gate by the time he arrived home, cold and furious and ready to have the rest of the argument indoors where it belonged. He told himself this with the certainty of a man who had spent 20 years being right about things and had started to confuse that record with infallibility. Outside, Nora stood in the empty garage and listened to the sound of the engine fade. The silence that replaced it was enormous. She opened her clutch purse and took out her phone. The screen lit up briefly, showing Evelyn's name in her recent contacts. And then it showed something else, 3% battery. And then it showed nothing. The screen went black and stayed black. She looked at the dead phone in her hand for a moment. Then she looked at the entrance ramp, where the rain was coming down in silver sheets against the darkness. Then she looked at the elevator she had come down, in which would take her back up to a hotel, where she had no room, no coat, no card, and where the desk staff would recognize her as Roman Voss's wife, and she would spend the rest of the night explaining herself. She gathered the hem of her gown in one hand and walked up the ramp into the rain. It hit her immediately, the cold shock of it soaking through the thin silk in seconds. By the time she reached the sidewalk, she was shivering in earnest, her heels finding uncertain purchase on the wet pavement. Lakeshore Drive was nearly empty. A cab passed without slowing. The jazz club, half a block north, was dark, its neon sign off the street in front of it deserted. She turned north because north felt like motion, and motion felt like the only thing she had left. She was 2 blocks from the hotel when she became aware of the footsteps. Not loud, not rushed, just present at a distance behind her, maintaining the same pace she maintained. She had lived in Roman's world long enough to understand the difference between coincidence and intention. She slowed slightly. The footsteps slowed. She knew. She turned toward the narrow gap between buildings, thinking of the lights of Michigan Avenue 1 block east, thinking of the distance and whether she could cover it in these heels, thinking of the dead phone in her purse and the rain in her eyes and the cold that had moved from her skin into her bones. She did not make it to Michigan Avenue. There were 2 of them. They came from the alley entrance, and they were fast and professional, and they knew exactly what they were doing. One caught her from behind before she could turn fully. The other took the phone from her hand. She fought. She got one elbow free and drove it backward with everything she had felt. It connect, heard a grunt of pain. But there were 2 of them, and she was barefoot effectively, in heels on wet pavement, and they were wearing boots, and it was over in less than 30 seconds. The last thing she saw before the dark closed in was the rain falling through the pale cone of a street light, each drop catching the light for a fraction of a second before it disappeared into the black street below. Roman arrived home at the Gold Coast estate at 2:54 in the morning. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey in his study and did not drink it. He sat in the leather chair behind his desk and waited for his phone to ring. It did not ring. He went upstairs at 3:30 and got into bed and told himself she was at Evelyn's. He told himself this with slightly less certainty than he had felt in the car. He fell into a shallow, restless sleep that felt less like rest than like the temporary suspension of a problem he had not yet agreed to face. When he woke at 9:15 the following morning, the other side of the bed was cold. The pillow beside his was unmarked. The bathroom was empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Evelyn Cross answered on the 3rd ring and told him in a voice that climbed quickly from cautious to frightened that Nora had not come to her, that Nora had not called, that Nora never turned her phone off, not once, in the years Evelyn had known her. Roman hung up and stood in the center of his bedroom and felt the floor of his certainty open beneath him. He called Decker Shaw. "Get everyone we have on the streets, now." Decker's voice was immediately completely awake. "What happened?" "Nora is missing," Roman said, and the 2 words tasted like something he could not name, something without a category in the 20 years of things he had learned to survive. "I left her at the Palmer House garage at 2 in the morning. I want every traffic camera, every ATM, every storefront feed between Lakeshore Drive and the Gold Coast pulled and reviewed. I want her phone traced. I want to know every step she took after I drove away." There was a pause, brief, the pause of a man absorbing something he understood immediately to be serious. "Consider it done," Decker said. Roman put the phone down and stood at the window and looked out at the gray November morning over Chicago and understood for the first time in a very long time what it felt like to be afraid. The call from Decker came at 11:45 in the morning. Roman was on his fourth cup of black coffee, standing at the window of his study, watching nothing. He had not changed out of his shirt from the night before. He had not eaten. He had spent the last 2 hours watching his phone with the particular quality of attention that is indistinguishable from prayer. Decker's voice on the line was tight and careful, the voice of a man who had learned over many years how to deliver bad news without flinching. "We found something," he said, "2 blocks north of the hotel, an alley behind the Marquette Club." Roman was already moving toward the door. "Where is she?" "We do not have her yet, but, Roman, the cameras on that corner were disabled before she got there. Professional job, not opportunistic. And we found her clutch purse against the east wall. Her phone was on the ground 6 feet away, screen destroyed. And there is blood on the pavement, not a small amount." Roman stopped walking. The hallway around him seemed to narrow. "Dr. Pruitt is already on site," Decker continued. "He says the dispersal pattern suggests a blow to the head, not arterial. She was struck. She went down. And then she was dragged toward the street. The rain washed most of it, but enough remained. Someone was waiting for her, Roman. They knew the blind spots. They killed the cameras in advance. This was not random." Roman did not answer. He was looking at the wall in front of him and not seeing it. The Maybach had him at the alley in 14 minutes. He pushed past his own men to get to the site. Decker was waiting under the fire escape with an umbrella held over a small designated area of wet pavement. Dr. Alton Pruitt crouched nearby, his wire-rimmed glasses beaded with rain, his expression carrying the clinical detachment of a man who had learned to keep his feelings entirely separate from his work. Roman looked at what remained on the ground. The silver clutch with the jeweled clasp, she had complained, was too difficult to open. The shattered phone. The dark rust-colored smear across the asphalt that the rain had not entirely erased. He crouched down and picked up the clutch with a gloved hand. He could smell the faint trace of her perfume beneath the rain and the wet concrete. Something moved through his chest that he did not have a name for and did not try to find one. The weapon in the alley was not left by accident, Pruitt said from behind him. Someone wanted it found. Roman stood, turned. Decker was holding an evidence bag. Inside, dripping with gray water, was a Glock 19 with a customized grip. Etched into the polymer was a double-headed eagle. Crude, deliberate, unmistakable. The crest of the Volkov Bratva. Roman took the bag from Decker's hand and looked at it for a long time. Viktor Ozerov, Decker said, "Has to be retaliation for the South Side Territory push last month. They waited for an opportunity, and last night you handed them one." Roman said nothing. He was looking at the eagle on the grip and running the logic forward and backward and arriving each time at the same uncomfortable place. Viktor Ozerov was many things. He was brutal. He was patient. He was capable of extraordinary violence. But Viktor was also, above all else, a man who understood leverage. If Viktor had taken Nora As a territorial response, there would have been a call by morning, a demand, a number. Victor did not take leverage and then go silent. Silence was not leverage. Silence was something else. But the thought was incomplete, and Roman's anger was already louder than his logic, and the eagle on that grip was the most concrete thing in front of him. He handed the bag back to Decker. "Find Captain Fisk," he said. "Tell him I need every automated license plate reader within 5 miles of this location pulled for a 45-minute window, starting at 2:15 this morning. Every van, every dark SUV, every vehicle with a commercial plate. I want the list within 2 hours. Fisk will say that kind of pull without a warrant will draw federal eyes," Decker said. "Then tell him what I will do to his pension and his boat and his weekend house in Michigan if he says no." Decker nodded once and moved away with his phone already at his ear. Roman looked back at the alley, at the place where she had fallen. He stood there for a moment in the rain and let himself feel the full weight of what he had done the night before, not as a strategic error, not as a miscalculation, but as the simple human thing. It was he had left her. He had chosen his pride over his wife. In the pettiest, most ordinary way, a man can make a catastrophic mistake. And now she was gone into the city, and the city was not a safe place for a woman alone at 2 in the morning. And he had known that when he told Gareth to drive. He had known it, and he had driven away anyway. He turned away from the alley and got back into the car and told Gareth to take him to River North. What Nora was doing in those same hours while Roman moved through the city, burning things down in the wrong direction, was this: she was surviving. She had woken in the dark with her cheek against cold concrete and a pain in her head that turned the edges of her vision white. For several seconds she did not know where she was or how she had arrived there. Then the sequence of the previous night assembled itself in her memory, and she understood. She was in a room, cinder-block walls, no windows, a single bulb behind a steel cage mounted to the ceiling. The light it threw was dim and institutional. Her wrists were bound behind her with zip ties, her ankles secured to the legs of a heavy wooden chair. She had lost her heels at some point. The concrete under her bare feet was very cold. She did not panic. She had thought about this in the abstract many times over 5 years of being Roman Voss's wife. She had thought, what would I do? She had talked herself through it in the small hours of anxious nights when sleep would not come, and the security detail outside the bedroom door felt less like protection and more like evidence of everything that could go wrong. She had an answer ready. It was not a comfortable answer, but it was an answer. She breathed. She took stock. Her hands were behind her. The zip ties were tight but not brutal, which meant whoever had secured her was professional enough to know you did not tie them so tight that you cut off circulation because a hostage with nerve damage in their hands became a management problem. Professional. That was information. She could hear voices beyond the door to her left. 2 men speaking in low registers that did not carry specific words, only tone. Bored, unhurried tone. They were not concerned about her. Another piece of information. She looked at the light fixture above her. The cage around the bulb was steel, bolted to the ceiling. No help. But the bulb itself, if she could reach it, would break, and broken glass had edges. She spent the next 40 minutes working on the zip ties against the wooden arm of the chair, looking for a sharp point in the grain of the old wood. She did not find one that worked, but she found something else. The rear left leg of the chair had a crack in it, old and deep, running up about 6 inches from the foot. The chair was not structurally sound. That was a different kind of information. She waited. Some hours later, one of the men brought her water and a protein bar with the particular impersonal efficiency of someone executing a task on a list. He checked her ties, tightened the one on her left wrist that had loosened slightly, and left without speaking to her. She catalogued everything about him that she could see: height, gait, the make of boots he was wearing, the fact that he carried his sidearm on his right hip and kept his left hand free, the fact that he did not meet her eyes, which meant he had been told not to engage with her, which meant someone had given him instructions about her specifically. She also catalogued the sound of the space beyond the door when he opened it. Concrete floors, high ceilings, an echo that suggested a large interior. The faint smell of motor oil and cold metal. An industrial building of some kind, not a basement. The floor was too level, the air too circulated. She thought about Miles. She had not let herself think about him directly yet, because she was not ready to hold what she had heard through the ventilation gap above. Her two voices she did not recognize discussing something in fragments she had caught between the hum of whatever industrial system ran through the ductwork above her head. She had caught a name. She was not yet ready to examine what the name meant. She looked at the cracked chair leg and began to apply pressure. Roman arrived at the Odessa bathhouse in River North at 1:30 in the afternoon with 12 men and enough directed aggression to level a city block. The Odessa was a known quantity. Everyone in Chicago's underworld knew what happened behind its steam rooms, high-stakes poker, the kind of hospitality that was never discussed openly, and the kind of business meetings that required absolute certainty that no recording device could function in a steam-saturated environment. Victor Ozerov held court there 3 afternoons a week. He was a creature of habit, which was both his greatest comfort and, on this particular Saturday, his most significant vulnerability. Roman did not negotiate entry. What happened inside the Odessa in the following 30 minutes was not something Roman would later think about with any particular feeling. It was a means to a specific end. He found Victor in the private room on the second floor, and what followed was the kind of conversation that only one party experiences as a conversation. Victor Ozerov was 64 years old and had survived things that would have destroyed most men. He was not easily broken, but Roman was not trying to break him. He was trying to read him. There was a difference, and Roman understood it. A man in genuine agony and a man performing agony look almost identical to someone who is not paying close attention. Roman was paying very close attention. By the time Victor was swearing on the graves of people Roman knew Victor actually loved, the calculation was complete. The confusion was real. The fear was real. Victor Ozerov had not taken Nora. Victor Ozerov did not know anything about Nora. The Glock in the alley had been placed there. Someone had planted it, knowing exactly what Roman would do when he saw that eagle on the grip. Someone who understood his temper and his loyalty structures and his tendency to move fast toward the most obvious explanation. Someone who knew him well enough to weaponize his instincts against him. Roman left the Odessa and stood on the wet sidewalk in the November afternoon and let that fact settle. He was already getting into the car when his encrypted phone rang, the one with the number known to exactly 4 people, Nora, Callum Reed, Decker Shaw, and his offshore banker. He answered it. The sound that came through first was industrial. Metal and distance and the low repetitive drip of water. Then a voice, male, the particular shape of a Boston Irish accent, the kind that came from specific neighborhoods and specific histories, and a specific kind of man who grew up understanding violence as a language before he learned any other. Well, the voice said, if it is not the King of Chicago. I heard you have been busy this afternoon, Voss, smashing up bathhouses, naughty behavior. Roman recognized the voice. He had never met the man in person, but he had heard recordings. He knew the name, Brennan Holt. Holt was a mercenary in the specific sense of the word, a man who had been exiled from the East Coast Irish organization for being too unpredictable, even by their considerable standards, and who now operated independently for whoever could meet his price. He surfaced every few years, attached to some operation that required a particular combination of ruthlessness and tactical competence, and then disappeared again. He was not ideological. He was not territorial. He was simply very good at causing controlled amounts of catastrophic damage, and then becoming invisible. I am going to assume, Roman said, keeping his voice completely flat, that you are going to tell me she is alive. She is alive, Holt said. She has a headache, and she is unhappy about her accommodations, but she is alive. She also, I will mention, broke one of my associate's fingers before we got her secured. Your wife is not a cooperative woman. What do you want? I do not want money, Holt said. I want the digital evidence package from the warehouse raid. The shipping logs, the manifests, the drives your technical people pulled from the Port Authority server the morning before the federal agents arrived on site. All of it. The complete chain of documentation. Roman was quiet for a moment. The weapons. They are not your weapons, Holt said, and his voice dropped the performative ease and went flat. They belong to people significantly larger than your operation, and your brother-in-law's incompetence got them flagged on a federal seizure list. My employers want that documentation scrubbed from existence. You have 24 hours to compile the package. I will send a drop location. Roman said, How did you know about the raid? I beg your pardon. The warehouse was raided yesterday afternoon. It has not appeared in any press. The federal filing is sealed. The only people who knew about that raid before this morning were inside my organization. So I am asking you a specific question. How did you know? There was a pause on the line, the sound of dripping water somewhere in the background of wherever Holt was calling from. You have a problem inside your house, Voss Holt said. I would focus on finding your wife before I spent too much time worrying about what that means. The line went dead. Roman sat in the back of the Maybach with the phone in his hand and did not speak for almost a full minute. Gareth did not ask anything. Decker was in the front passenger seat. He turned his head slightly toward the back, but did not look directly at Roman. The warehouse raid, Roman said. Who knew? Decker went still, beyond the inner circle. Nobody. Yumi Callum and the men who moved the drives. Roman looked at the back of Callum Reed's name in his mind. He had been with him for 10 years. He had stood beside him at Roman's wedding. He had been the first person Roman called when things went wrong for a decade because Callum was the person things did not go wrong with. He pulled out the secondary phone he used for operational tracking, the one Callum did not know existed, the one Roman had installed 2 years ago, not out of specific suspicion of anyone, but out of the general principle that a man in his position who trusted completely deserved whatever happened to him. He opened the location history. Callum's secondary phone had pinged a cell tower in Uptown at 2:30 in the morning, 2 blocks from the alley behind the Marquette Club. Roman looked at the screen for a long time. Then he put the phone in his breast pocket and said very quietly, Callum, tell him I need him in the car. 20 minutes later, Callum Reed slid into the seat across from Roman in the back of the Maybach, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who believed he was attending a routine briefing. He had that quality of practiced normality that had served him so well for so many years. It did not serve him now. Roman showed him the location data without saying anything. Callum looked at the screen. Something happened to his face. It was very small and very fast, and in a different man in a different context, it might have been easy to miss. Roman did not miss it. I can explain, Callum said. Roman waited. What came out of Callum Reed in the next 4 minutes was not quite a confession and not quite a justification. It was something in between. He had been contacted 6 weeks ago, an intermediary he had used before on third-party arrangements. The offer was structured as a business proposition, facilitate the removal of Roman Voss from operational control of the syndicate in exchange for a senior position in the reorganized structure that would follow. He had agreed because he had been watching the organization lose ground for 18 months, and he believed, genuinely believed, that Roman's reluctance to expand into certain revenue streams was going to cost them everything eventually. He had done it, he said, because he thought it was the only way to preserve what they had built. He began to say the name of the person who had approached him through the intermediary. Roman shot him twice before he finished the sentence. It was not rage. It was something colder than rage. It was the enactment of a principle Roman had held since he was 19 years old, that betrayal had exactly one correct response, and hesitation in delivering that response was itself a form of weakness he could not afford. He told Gareth to drive to the rail yard in Cicero. He told Decker to call the cleaning crew. He sat in the back of the car and looked at his hands and thought about the name Callum had been about to say. He had not let him finish. He did not need to. He had heard enough of it in the half-second before he made his decision to know the first syllable. And the first syllable was enough. Back in the building where she was being held, Nora had broken the chair. It had taken sustained, patient pressure over the course of what she estimated was 4 to 5 hours, shifting her weight in specific increments, applying force to the cracked leg at the angle most likely to compromise the joint. When it finally gave fast, the leg splitting away from the seat, with a sharp crack that she immediately turned into a coughing fit, loud and sustained, to cover the sound. Nobody came. She worked the broken leg free with her bound hands, found the jagged end of the split wood, and began moving it against the zip tie on her left wrist. It took a long time. Her arms ached, and the angle was wrong, and twice she cut herself on the wood before she found the right motion. But she found it. The tie snapped. Her left hand came free. The rest was faster. She was on her feet and moving before the relief of it had fully registered. She assessed the door, the hinges, the gap at the bottom. She looked up and found the ventilation shaft cover set into the wall near the ceiling, accessible from the top of what remained of the broken chair if she stacked the pieces correctly. What she found in the ventilation shaft lying flat in the dark and moving by touch and sound was something she had not anticipated. Below her, through a vent cover, she could see light through, but not remove, was a room, and in that room someone was on a phone. The phone was on speaker. She heard every word. She heard Brennan Holt describe the terms of the arrangement to the person on the other end of the line. She heard the other voice respond. She heard it give instructions. She heard it say, with the particular cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, that the timeline needed to accelerate, that Roman would be coming for the building within hours, and that by the time he arrived, the outcome needed to be predetermined. She lay in the dark of the ventilation shaft and listened to her brother's voice give orders for her husband's death. She did not move for a long time after the call ended. She had loved Miles with the specific, uncomplicated devotion of a younger sibling who believed her older brother was fundamentally good. She had defended him to Roman more than once. She had explained away his choices, his associates, his lifestyle as the reasonable ambitions of a man trying to build something. She understood now, constructed an entire architecture of charitable interpretation around a person who had not deserved it. She thought of him at the gala the previous night. The slightly too new suit, the practiced smile, the 40 seconds with Callum at the bar that she had filed away and not yet fully examined. She thought of Roman, who had known something was wrong with Miles long before she did, and had tried to protect both of them without telling her the full truth, which was its own kind of betrayal. but a fundamentally different kind, a kind rooted in protection rather than profit. She started moving again through the shaft forward toward the light she could see at the far end. She was nearly at the cover when she heard footsteps in the shaft behind her. Holt's men had found the empty chair. She dropped through the vent cover at the end of the shaft into a corridor she did not recognize, hit the concrete hard with her bare feet, ignored the pain, and ran. She found a heavy steel door, found it unlocked, and pushed through into a vast dark space that smelled of cold metal and old industry. A processing floor of some kind, the ceiling high above her, lost in shadow chains, hanging at intervals from overhead rails, the floor stained dark with decades of use. She found a length of steel pipe on the ground near a derelict workstation. She picked it up without slowing. She heard them coming into the space behind her, and she kept moving toward the far wall, toward the deeper dark, toward the large insulated door she could see standing slightly ajar at the far end of the floor. She went through it and into the cold, and pulled it most of the way closed behind her, and stood in the freezing dark, the pipe in both hands, and waited to see what came through the door. What came through the door 20 minutes later was not one of Holt's men. It was Roman. She had been standing in the dark for long enough that the cold had moved from discomfort into something more serious. Her feet were numb against the frost-covered concrete. Her breath came out in visible clouds that dissolved into the freezing air of the deep storage room. The pipe was heavy in her hands, and she had not lowered it. When the door pushed open and Roman came through it, she did not lower it then either. He stopped. He saw the pipe first, then her face, then the bruise along her cheekbone that had gone deep purple in the hours since it was made. Something happened to his expression that she had never seen on him before and did not have a name for. She took a step back. The pipe stayed up. "Do not," she said, "do not come any closer." He raised both hands. He had a rifle on a tactical sling across his chest, and he let it hang free and raised his hands to shoulder height and stood very still in the threshold of the freezer door. He was wearing body armor over a dress shirt that was ruined beyond recovery, and there was someone else's blood on his jaw, and he looked like a man who had spent the last several hours moving through the world with no regard whatsoever for his own safety. He said her name, just her name the way he had said it when they were first married, and he would come home late and find her asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest, quietly, like it was something he was relieved still existed. She kept the pipe up. "Play it for me," she said. He looked at her without understanding. "Holt had a phone," she said. "He played me an audio recording before his men put me in this room. Your voice, Roman, negotiating with a cartel liaison, telling them that Miles was a liability, telling them to authorize the federal raid on his warehouse, telling them you were going to use the seizure to consolidate the weapons for your own operation without breaking the truce." She stopped. Her voice was steady, but the effort of keeping it steady was visible. "And then Holt told me that you knew they were coming for me last night, that leaving me in that garage was not your pride. It was your plan. Roman stood in the doorway with his hands still raised and looked at her across the freezing dark. Part of that is true, he said. The pipe did not waver. I ordered the raid, he said. That part of what you heard is real. I did contact the cartel liaison. I did arrange for federal jurisdiction to come down on that warehouse. The breath went out of her in a single, sharp exhale. But the rest of it, he said, his voice dropping to something she had to lean slightly forward to hear over the hum of the refrigeration units. The rest of it is a fabrication, a very good one. Callum had access to every recorded negotiation I have conducted in the last 3 years. He had the raw audio files. What you heard was real sentences cut apart and reassembled into a story that did not happen. She stared at him. Her arms were shaking partly from the weight of the pipe and partly from the cold and partly from something else entirely. Why, she said, why did you order the raid? Roman lowered his hands by a few inches. She did not tell him to raise them again, because Miles owed the Sinaloa cartel $4 million, he said. He had been skimming from their shipments for 6 months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, the way it always goes, with men who convince themselves they are smarter than the people they are stealing from. By October, they had a precise accounting of what he had taken, and they had made a decision about how to collect it. I found out through a contact 3 weeks ago. The collection method they had chosen was not financial. She looked at him and did not say anything. I could not pay it for him, Roman said, not directly. If I paid his debt, it would signal to the cartel that my operation was connected to his theft, and that conversation would have ended with both of us in a much worse position. The only clean solution was to make the shipment disappear into federal custody. A seizure is nobody's fault. A seizure is an act of the government, which is a force even the cartel does not negotiate with directly. I tipped off Captain Fisk. I paid for the federal jurisdiction. I had the weapons moved on to Miles's manifest so the seizure would be attached to his site and the cartel's accounting would show the merchandise lost to law enforcement rather than to Miles's skimming. It erased his debt. It kept him alive. She was very quiet. I did not tell you, he said, because I knew that if you knew you would go to Miles. You would want to confront him, to warn him, to give him the chance to explain himself. And if Miles knew the operation existed, he would panic, and the whole architecture of it would collapse, and he would end up exactly where I was trying to prevent him from ending up. He took one step into the freezer. She did not raise the pipe higher. I left you in that garage because of my pride, he said. Not because of a plan. Not because I knew anyone was coming. I was angry, and I was arrogant, and I made the worst decision of my life. And I have been living with what that decision cost for the last 18 hours, and I will live with it for the rest of my life. But I did not use you. I have never used you. Whatever else I have done in the years we have been married, I have never once put you in danger deliberately. The pipe came down slowly, not all the way, just enough that her arms could rest. She looked at him across the frozen space between them, and tried to find the lie in his face. She had spent 5 years learning his face. She knew the difference between the version of Roman that performed honesty and the version that simply was honest, because the performed version was very good and the real version was not performed at all. It was just a man without anywhere left to hide, which was what was standing in front of her now. She believed him. She was still deciding what to do with that belief when the door behind Roman opened fully and the light from the processing floor flooded in, and Brennan Holt stepped through it with a military-grade pistol pointed at the center of Roman's back. And behind Holt, with his hands in the pockets of a charcoal cashmere overcoat that did not have a single mark on it, was Miles Ashford. He looked exactly as he had looked at the gala the night before, composed, slightly too well put together, the practiced ease of a man performing belonging. He looked at Nora with an expression she recognized from their childhood, the look he had worn when he was about to explain to their mother why something that was clearly his fault was actually more complicated than it appeared. "Hello?" he said. His voice was gentle. It was the voice he used when he wanted to be forgiven in advance for something. She looked at her brother and felt something in her chest go very quiet. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of a door closing. "Miles," she said. "I was in the ventilation shaft above the operations room. I heard the call." He absorbed this without visibly reacting. A small adjustment in his posture, a slight recalibration. "Then you know that I am not trying to hurt you," he said. "I have never wanted to hurt you. This has nothing to do with you personally." "You kidnapped me," she said. "I needed Roman away from his house and his people," Miles said. "You were the only lever large enough to move him." He looked at Roman with an expression of something that was almost from a certain angle respect. "You are actually more difficult to move than I anticipated. Most men with leverage applied to someone they love make mistakes immediately. You made fewer mistakes than I expected." Roman said nothing. He was watching Holt, who was watching him, with the relaxed attention of a professional who has done this enough times that the anticipation of violence no longer produces any particular feeling in him. "I want you to understand something," Miles said, and now he was speaking to Nora directly, with the full sincerity of a man who genuinely believed what he was about to say. "Roman has been running this organization into the ground for 2 years. He refuses the cartel's distribution contracts. He refuses the trafficking arrangements. He is leaving hundreds of millions of dollars on the table because of a moral framework that has no place in this business. The people around him can see it happening. Callum saw it. I saw it. The organization is bleeding, and he is proud of the wound." She looked at her brother for a long moment. "So you decided to replace him," she said. "I decided to save what he built before he finished destroying it," Miles said. "The cartel wanted a new Midwest operation. They wanted someone willing to work with them fully. I offered them that. In exchange, I get the syndicate, the infrastructure, the network. It is a business transaction. Roman steps down, or Roman is removed. Either way, the result is the same." "And I was leverage," Nora said. "A tool." Miles looked at her with genuine regret, which was perhaps the most disturbing thing about him in this moment, that the regret was real, and it coexisted without apparent difficulty with everything else he had done. "You were a necessity," he said. "I am sorry for the bruise. That was not supposed to happen. Holt's men were supposed to bring you in clean." Holt said from behind Roman, "This is very moving, but the sirens in the distance are getting closer, and I have a schedule." Miles nodded once. He reached into the interior pocket of his overcoat and produced a polished chrome Beretta. He held it with the comfort of a man who had handled firearms long enough that they no longer felt like objects, but like extensions of a decision already made. He pointed it at Roman. Nora watched her husband in the moment before the shooting started. He was not looking at Miles or at the gun. He was looking at her. And what was on his face was not fear or calculation or the cold operational focus she had seen him wear in difficult situations over 5 years of marriage. It was something simpler and more devastating than any of those things. It was the look of a man who is trying to memorize a face because he understands he may not see it again. He said, "I love you. Don't look." Then he moved. He did not go for cover. Roman Voss did not, in the fundamental crisis of his life, choose self-preservation. He drove his body directly toward Holt, recognizing the trained mercenary as the more dangerous of the two threats, the one with the discipline and the reflexes that made him lethal in a way that Miles, for all his cold ambition, was not. Miles fired. The bullet caught Roman in the left shoulder and spun him, but did not stop him. He hit Holt with enough momentum to drive the mercenary back into the doorframe, and Holt's gun discharged into the ceiling, a deafening crack that filled the frozen space with a sound like the world splitting. Nora did not look away. She had never been good at being told not to look. The revolver she had been holding was gone. She had set it down when Roman came through the door, and it was on the frost-covered floor, 6 feet to her left. She saw Roman go down to one knee, his arm hanging wrong, trying to bring his body back to functional with the sheer, stubborn force of will that had always been the most fundamental thing about him. She saw Miles taking aim again with the Beretta, steadying his wrist, his face completely composed. She crossed the distance to the revolver in 3 steps. Her bare feet found no traction on the frost, and she went down on one knee, scooped the revolver off the floor, and in the same motion drove it low across the ice toward Roman, the way you slide something across a table to someone who needs it urgently. It hit his knee. His hand found it. Miles fired at the same moment. Roman raised the revolver, and Miles's shot went wide by 2 inches, close enough that Nora heard it pass. Roman fired twice. The shots were not aimed with precision. They could not be from a man kneeling on ice with a shattered shoulder and a weapon he had picked up off the floor a half-second ago. But they did not need to be precise. They needed to be sufficient. Brennan Holt took both rounds in the center of his chest, and the force of them lifted him off his feet and put him against the steel wall, and he slid down it and did not get up. Miles turned the Beretta toward Roman with the specific expression of a man who has decided to stop hesitating. The 3-round burst came through the open doorway from outside. Decker Shaw stood in the threshold with an M4 still raised, a shrapnel cut, bleeding freely down his left cheek, his body armor torn at the shoulder. He lowered the weapon after a moment and looked at the room with the methodical assessment of a man checking his work. Miles Ashford was on the floor. He was looking at the ceiling with an expression of what appeared in the seconds before his eyes went still to be genuine surprise, as though the logical conclusion of everything he had set in motion had not, until this precise moment, seemed like a real possibility. Roman was on the ice, with his back against the steel wall, his left arm completely non-functional, his breathing shallow and rapid in the freezing air. The front of his dress shirt was dark and spreading darker. Nora crossed the floor and went down beside him. She pressed both hands over the wound with the pressure she had been told once years ago in a first aid course. She had attended thinking she would never need it. She pressed hard, and she kept pressing, and she did not let herself look at how much blood there was. "Look at me," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were present, unfocused at the edges, but present in the center. "I came back," he said. His voice was barely audible under the hum of the refrigeration units and the distant sound of Decker coordinating on his radio outside the door. "I know," she said. She pressed harder. "I know you did. Stay with me now." His good hand came up and found her wrist. His grip was weak but intentional. He was holding on to her the way you hold on to something you are not willing to release, even when your body is making a compelling argument for letting everything go. "Decker," she said without looking up. "Already called," Decker said from the doorway. 6 minutes. She kept her hands where they were, and she kept her eyes on Roman's face, and she talked to him about nothing in particular. The gala, the music, the champagne. She had never actually drunk. Small, ordinary things delivered in a steady voice that was the only thing she had left to give him. His grip on her wrist did not loosen. His eyes stayed on her face. When the world faded for him, it faded slowly, the edges going first, the cold going, and the last thing he was aware of before Northwestern Memorial and the surgical team and the 3 days of dark that followed was the pressure of her hands over the wound and her voice level and close, telling him to stay. He tried. The private room at Northwestern Memorial was quiet, in the way hospitals are quiet at night, not silent but subdued, the sounds muffled and institutional, the light low and amber behind the curtains. The heart monitor made its steady, uninflected statement of continuity. Outside the window, Chicago, in the small hours of Tuesday morning, looked cold and permanent the way it always looked, from a height like a thing that had decided to exist and could not be persuaded otherwise. Roman opened his eyes. He was aware of weight before anything else, the weight of his own body against the bed, the weight of the bandaging on his shoulder, the particular heaviness that was morphine doing its careful, impersonal work. He blinked at the ceiling, then he turned his head. Gareth Cole was sitting in the chair beside the bed, a paperback closed on his knee, looking at Roman with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and is relieved that it has finally happened. 3 days, Gareth said before Roman could ask. Surgery was Saturday evening. Today is Tuesday. The bullet did not hit the artery. Dr. Pruitt managed the paperwork, so there is no official record of the admission under your name. You are registered as a Mr. Robert Vance from Evanston with a construction accident. Roman looked at the ceiling again. He said, "Where is she?" Gareth looked at his shoes. The pause lasted long enough to tell Roman everything he needed to know before Gareth said anything at all. "She was here," Gareth said. "She did not leave this room for 2 days. She slept in that chair maybe 4 hours total. She would not eat properly. Ms. Cross came and sat with her on Sunday evening, and they were here together through Sunday night. When the surgical team confirmed on Monday morning that you were fully stable and out of any danger, she asked me to step out of the room for a few minutes." Roman waited. "When I came back in, Gareth said she was gone. She had a bag. She must have had it brought by someone. Lucas drove her to O'Hare. He would not tell me the destination. She asked him not to." Roman turned his head toward the window. The city sat there in the dark, glittering and indifferent, doing what it always did. Gareth reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. It was a good envelope, heavy paper, cream-colored, the kind Nora ordered from a stationer on Michigan Avenue that Roman had always thought was an unnecessary extravagance and had never said so. His name was written on the front in her handwriting, which was the kind of handwriting that looked like a decision rather than an accident. "She left this," Gareth said. He set it on the tray table within Roman's reach and settled back in his chair. Roman looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he reached for it with his good hand. The letter was 2 pages, written on both sides in the same deliberate hand as the envelope. She had not rushed it. The sentences were complete and considered in the way that meant she had thought about each one before she put it down. "Roman," it began, "if you are reading this, you are alive, which means Gareth's instructions to call me the moment anything changed were followed. And it means the doctors were right. And it means I can breathe again in a way I have not been able to breathe since Saturday night. I have been sitting in this chair for 2 days, being grateful for the sound of a machine that confirms you are still here. I want you to know that. I want that to be the first thing you read." He read it twice before continuing. "I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. I want to be clear about that because I think you will assume otherwise, and you will be wrong. And I would rather be honest about it now than have you spend years operating on a false premise. Because you are a man who builds things on premises, and if the premise is wrong, everything built on it will be wrong in the same direction. I am leaving because I stood in a freezer on Saturday night and looked at my brother and understood what this world does to people, not the enemies, not the strangers, the people who start out as something good and get consumed so slowly they do not notice it happening until there is nothing left of the original thing. Miles was not always who he was on Saturday. He was someone else once. I remember who he was. And the distance between who he was and who he became is the distance this life creates in people, and it creates it reliably without exception. And I have been watching it create it in you for 2 years, and I cannot watch it finish." Roman stopped reading. He looked at the window. The city looked back. "You told me once that you do what you have to do to protect your empire. I believed you. I still believe you. But an empire built on what yours is built on is not a thing that can be protected indefinitely. It can only be maintained, and maintaining it costs something every year, and what it costs is not money. I watched you pay that cost for 5 years, and I watched it take things from you that I do not think you even noticed losing, because the losing was so gradual. I noticed. I kept a private accounting of everything this life took from the man I married, and the balance has been running in one direction for a long time. I forgive you for the garage. I want you to know that clearly and without qualification. You made a terrible decision for a very human reason, and you spent the next 18 hours paying for it in every way a person can pay for something, and I was there for most of it, and I watched you pay it, and it is done. It is forgiven. It is not why I am leaving. I am leaving because staying would eventually make me into something I do not want to become. I have already become things I did not intend to become. I am better at performing than I used to be. I am better at noticing exits. I am better at reading rooms for threat and calculating angles and maintaining composure in situations that should terrify me, and none of that is neutral. None of that is just skill. That is the shape the life makes in a person when they live it long enough. I want to find out what shape I am when this life is not making it for me. Do not look for me. I am asking you this as directly as I know how to ask for anything, not because I do not want to be found in the abstract, but because if you find me, I will not be strong enough to leave again, and I need to leave. Let me be the thing that reminds you that there is a different way to live. Let me be the proof that you built something worth loving, even if you cannot keep it. The house is yours, the cars, everything. I do not want any of it. I want to sleep without listening for something to go wrong. That is all I want right now. I will think of you every day. That is not a comfort I am offering you. It is just true. Always Nora. Roman read the letter twice, the second time slower than the first. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and held it in his hand and looked at the Chicago skyline through the hospital window for a long time without moving. The morphine made the edges of things soft, but did not touch the center of anything. The center was very clear. Gareth said after a while, "I can have the tail number of the charter pulled inside of an hour. Lucas knows which terminal she left from. With that and the time window, we can have a destination inside of 2 hours and boots on the ground inside of 6. Roman did not answer immediately. He thought about what she had written about miles, about the distance between who a person was and who they became. He thought about his father's barber shop and the men who had walked out of it, and the version of himself he had spent 20 years insisting he was not becoming. He thought about a note on a kitchen counter, a drive to Galena in January. the weight of a hand on his wrist in a freezer while he was trying to hold on to something. He thought about the letter which he was still holding, which he did not put down. "No," he said. Gareth looked at him. "Let her go." The words cost him something he could not calculate. He said them anyway, with the same finality he brought to every decision that could not be walked back, because he understood, in the way he understood very few things with complete clarity, that this one could not be walked back and should not be, and that the restraint of not walking it back was perhaps the only genuinely unselfish thing he had done in a very long time. He tucked the letter beneath his pillow, against his chest, where he would feel it when he moved. "Call Decker," he said. "Tell him I want a full accounting of every cartel contact that ran through Callum's network in the last 6 months. Tell him I want the name of every intermediary Miles used. Tell him to start with Chicago and work outward. There is a great deal of territory that has just become available, and I want it secured before anyone else decides they have a claim to it." Gareth stood, reached for his phone, paused. "You sure about the other thing?" he said. "About letting her go?" Roman looked at the window. The dawn was beginning at the eastern edge of the skyline, the faintest gray-blue suggestion of morning arriving the way it always arrived over the lake, indifferent to what the city had done while it was dark. "No," Roman said. He said it honestly, which was rarer for him than it should have been. "I am not sure at all." He kept looking at the window. "But I am doing it anyway." Gareth left. The door closed softly. The heart monitor continued its steady, patient work. Roman lay in the quiet room with the letter under his pillow and his good hand resting on his chest, and the whole enormous weight of the city outside the glass, the city he had bled for and built in and buried people in and called his, and for the first time in 20 years he did not know what he wanted from it. He closed his eyes. Outside Chicago moved into Tuesday morning, the way it always did, without ceremony, without acknowledgment of what the night had cost, without any particular interest in the men and women who had spent the dark hours tearing pieces out of each other in its streets and freezers and parking garages. The lake was steel gray under a low sky. The traffic on Lakeshore Drive was beginning to thicken. Somewhere in the city, people were making coffee and reading the news and getting on with the ordinary transaction of their lives, which continued regardless. Somewhere above it all, a plane was crossing the cloud cover, heading east or south, or toward some horizon that Nora Ashford had chosen for reasons that were entirely her own. Roman did not know which direction. He had made sure of that. In the chair where she had sat for 2 days, the indentation in the cushion was still faintly visible. Gareth would not notice it, but Roman, when he turned his head and looked at it in the early morning light, noticed it with the precision of a man who had learned too late and at extraordinary cost to pay attention to the things that mattered. He did not look away from it for a long time.